My name is Jon McGee. I'm not gifted. I guess I'll start with that. I'm Vice President for Planning and Strategy for the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. And I get the last session before you go to dinner on the other campus. I do know what time the first bus is scheduled to leave for those of you who are taking a bus. So we're going to wrap up a little bit earlier. We will wrap up before 5. I'm going to offer some comments, and then we're going to do some of the table exercises again. I have 3 questions. They're a little different because I don't think we're really here to resolve all the budget issues that we have, and in fact, we can't do it. And I know that the people in this room are differentially involved in budget processes on their campuses. So I want to be sensitive to that. But I also want to wrap up what we just heard from the panel, but a little bit about what we've heard throughout the day today. I guess I'd start with this. When I was 25 years old and right out of graduate school, I got a job with the Minnesota Department of Finance with the ridiculously vainglorious title of Executive Budget Officer. I didn't feel very executive at 25 years old. However, among the things I actually had responsibility for was signing off on behalf of the executive branch on $1.5 billion of appropriation to higher education, which meant nothing because if I didn't sign it, somebody else would. But nonetheless, it felt like a lot of zeros at the time. It is a lot of zeros at the time. But I started in June of 1988, and I learned 4 things in 4 months. Really quickly. The first is that the spreadsheet exercise of budgeting is really simple. It's just a bunch of pluses and minuses that at the end of the day have to add up to something greater than or equal to 0. That's it. It was revelatory at the time because I'd had a class in budgeting, public budgeting in graduate school. But when we got there, it wasn't complicated math. I needed to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, using Lotus spreadsheet software at the time, prior to Excel. That was the first thing. But the second thing is that values, choices, and trade-offs are, in fact, very difficult. And that's the whole budget conversation. We too often view budgeting through the lens of accounting, and we expect magic to jump off of spreadsheets. And it took no time at all to determine that there is no magic on the spreadsheet, and in fact, it's not even close to an accounting exercise, except that at the end of the day, it had to add up to something greater than or equal to 0. But it was the choices that were the subject of all of the energy and all of the angst. The third lesson was that history is powerful, really powerful, in a way, in an inertial kind of way. That is, we talked a lot about zero-based budgeting. We never did that. And almost nobody does true zero-based budgeting. And almost all budget processes begin with an argument about the base. I got to know that I have my base. And if I'm secure in my base, then we can argue all we want about the increments. But the base had to be, that's a Meghan Trainor thing, isn't it? But the base was really, sorry, very few people got that in here. I have children, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the base meant everything. And finally, reality always, not sometimes, reality always intervenes to wreck models. Always. All models are built on if-then statements. If the if changes, then the then changes. And so we try to assign, so models become something like shiny objects where we believe in what the model has said because the model has somehow magically told us that. Models are only as good as the data and assumptions put into them, and when the data or the experience or the assumptions change, then they're not very good anymore. But we struggle with that. So that was those were 4 powerful lessons that I want to start with as we think about the economics of higher education. But I want to frame all of it this way. We live in grumpy times. Really grumpy times. But those of us who have the opportunity and really the privilege to spend our lives on college or school campuses no differently, because the work we do lives at the intersection of aspiration and opportunity. That's what we do. And it doesn't matter whether you're faculty or staff. That's what we do. The day-to-day challenges we experience or the sometimes disruptive events that occur on our campuses notwithstanding, we are all in the hopeful business of the future. So last year, in a survey my office did of St. Ben's and St. John's seniors, 94% of them, I wanted to ask the question, how optimistic are you about your future? With the sort of frame that we live in grumpy times. Are students, in fact, optimistic about their future? And 94% of our students responded saying that they were optimistic about their future. I felt really good about that. I think that that's extraordinary. The optimism of youth surrounds us, and it very often sustains us, and it should sustain us. We work in an amazing industry. Now, to Carlene's point before about closure, I'm actually not so sure how many colleges are going to close, because we resist that to the end of the day. We will morph and morph and morph and morph. We never say, geez, it's been a good run, lock it down, we're done. Colleges generally don't do that. And even at a closure rate of 25 or 30 or 40 a year, that's still, there's still many, many colleges. There are today in the United States 4,360 degree-granting institutions of higher education. That's 1,000 more than in 1986-87. All of that, nearly all of that growth occurred among for-profit institutions. But today, those 4,360 institutions enroll nearly 20 million students of all ages, types, and abilities. That's 1/3 more than in the year 2000. Demand for higher education at all levels and of all types has really been extraordinary. So the pressure to close tends to be more particular, and the particulars of institutions, more than it is that there's just the demand for higher education is drying up or has dried up. If there is a program that can be imagined, it exists somewhere. The classification of instructional programs today includes nearly 1,900 academic programs of study, and some of them are so amazing. Commercial blasting is one of them. I love that one. Ayurvedic medicine, yoga. One of my favorite programs in all of Minnesota is at Winona Technical and Community College, whatever it's called now, I actually don't know. But the program was on Zamboni repair, because somebody's got to fix those things. And if you're from Minnesota and the state of hockey, somebody's got to know how to fix a Zamboni. And you can do that for a degree. The overall economic returns to higher education are unambiguous and extraordinary. College graduates earn more on average than those who haven't gone to college. They are significantly less likely to be unemployed than those who haven't gone to college. They are significantly less likely to be out of the labor force than those who haven't gone to college. And in 2014, research by the Pew Research Center, they found that 9 in 10 adults who had earned a bachelor's degree said that that decision either had payoff or would pay off in relation to what they paid for it. That is an extraordinary response about the value of higher education. The 2-year and 4-year battle that's being waged, 2-year or 4-year, is fake news. It's a false choice. We need both. In May of 2018, the unemployment rate for Americans over age 25 who had a baccalaureate degree was 1.8%. The unemployment rate for Americans over age 25 who had earned an associate's degree was 2.3%. In either case, that's actually beyond full employment, that there's a demand for both. The question is not either or, but rather the education that best fits and serves the aspirations and abilities of individual students. And we'd be far better off focusing our attention on that than we are in a winner-take-all game about I'm better than you. And as a parent of 4 kids, I have heard that a lot in my own house. So we have every reason to be here today to celebrate. But I know in doing this presentation, but they already did it on the panel, that I could take you from 0 to Xanax in a really short period of time. But I'm not exactly going to do that. But I do want to frame it this way. Given what Lucy J. and Nathan had to say, and by the way, if you haven't read Nathan's book, Demographics and the Demand for Higher Education, I get the sort of second part right, Nathan, you should read that. Available on Amazon and from the Johns Hopkins University Press. It's a terrific book that you should read about higher education. We can define the market pressure points we experience today in higher education along 4 lines. They're really easy because they're alliterative. Accessibility, affordability, accountability, and sustainability. So accessibility, who will have access to what kind of college? That's a big question. And by the way, when you get into the political divides where people will say, 4-year college isn't for everybody, they are very often, by the way, not talking about their kids. They're talking about somebody else's kids when they make that statement, which I find actually wildly disingenuous and wrong. Nonetheless, who will have access to what kind of education? That's a demographic question, an economic question, and a market position question. Who will have access to my education at my institution? Affordability, really simple, right? How will they pay for it? The problem is that breaks out in the form of 2 simultaneous questions that have to be answered. Who can afford us? And whom can we afford as an institution? This is a scary question. It's a terribly scary question for colleges. I assure you, it is a terribly scary question for families. I'm the parent of 4 children, ages 13, 17, 18, and 21. We're Catholic. So they're from 2015 to 2027, we will have children in college every year. And beginning this fall, we will have 2 in college for 5 consecutive years. So I did a little back of the envelope calculation for my wife. She did not ask for this. But I said, you know, I have 3 brothers. She has 3 siblings as well. In fact, her family mirrors my own. We were all in college from fall 1980, I'm the oldest, to spring 1989. 3 of us went to private institutions, 1 went to a public university. My parents faced pre-financial aid cost of attendance, and we needed financial aid to go to school. They faced pre-financial aid cost of attendance for the 4 of us in total of $100,000 for those 9 years. I have 4 children. If they made the same 4 institutional choices to have, then my wife and I would face, at least theoretically, pre-financial aid price of attendance that's 8.5 times higher than the price that my parents faced. And when I told my wife this, which was, we've been married long enough that I should have known not to tell her that, because she looked at me like I was from Mars and said, why'd you tell me that? And the best I could muster was, I thought you needed to know. Okay, and then she just went on with whatever she was doing. Nonetheless, it's a horribly frightening proposition for families, and it's frightening for us as institutions, but it's frightening for families as well. Accountability, and that was addressed this morning and this afternoon. What kinds of outcomes ought students, parents, and society expect of higher education? What's the purpose of higher education? Is this worth it? And what about it makes it worth it? This is a significant investment, and not just of money, but of time, of psyche, of soul into this experience. What makes it worth it? And what makes my place worth it in relation to somebody else's? And finally, sustainability. What resources will colleges have to continuously improve quality and maintain accessibility? And oh yeah, those often operate at cross purposes, that you're making a trade-off of one for the other, and it's really difficult. So that's kind of the frame that we find ourselves in economically. There isn't one economic model of higher education. There are many, many models in practice. Most institutions, their practice is simply adaptive, and that's the way it's always going to be. There is no single answer to any of this. There's no single destination. There's only adaptive practice and direction. So I was an Apollo junkie. I was 7 years old when they landed on the moon. And so I thought that was the coolest thing ever then, and I still do, to the point where I became sort of a space history junkie. I love to read about that. So think of this as firing rockets on a rocket, on a ship, a spaceship, that they're constantly firing them, controlled burns, to make small changes in direction, always directional, but they need to continuously fire them, because if they don't, they'll veer off course. It's the same for us. So why does college cost so much anyway? Well, the first problem is we confuse cost and price all the time. And economists can jump on us all, and they should for that, because in fact, cost and price are 2 entirely different things. But in terms of cost of college, we confuse them, and we don't explain it or understand it very well, including on our campuses. We tend to look at it through accounting terms that 5 people understand, or economic terms that 2 people understand, without really being able to translate them for, when I wrote a book, and when the book came out, the first thing one of my teenage sons said, this was 3 years ago, when I was going to give him a copy, said, "Dad, is anybody normal going to read this?" I had to go with him on that. And so this is anybody normal going to understand the way we talk about this? And as soon as you say Ball-Mall's disease, nobody knows what that is. It's not like a sort of shaving cream. But people don't understand that, and because we don't understand it, I don't think we frame it well. In fact, the cost of education is largely shaped by 4 factors that all live within the context of mission and values. The first is, it's breadth, depth, scale, and level of investment. So breadth. How much do you offer or provide in terms of curriculum, co-curriculum, research, athletics, whatever? How much do you offer? Depth. How many choices or options do you provide within those offerings? Do you have 1 study abroad program? Do you have 18 study abroad programs? Do you have 1 athletic team? Do you have 20? Do you have 20 academic majors? Do you have 40 academic majors? So breadth, depth, scale. How are the costs associated with that breadth and depth spread across students? And are we spreading high costs across many students, which lowers the cost per student, or high costs across fewer students, which results obviously in higher cost per student, which is where most smaller colleges and private institutions find themselves. We all have a library. I might have 1,000 students, you might have 3,000 students. The library has a cost, basically a fixed cost. And it's different to spread it across 1,000 students than 3,000 students. And finally, level of investment. How much do we invest in our people, plant, operations, and experiences? That reflects what an institution can or chooses to spend to deliver the breadth, depth, and scale of its experience. And all of that happens within the context of mission and values. We treat those 4 pieces, breadth, depth, scale, and investment, too often as if they're independent variables, when in fact they're constantly pinging each other. They're also being pinged by mission and values, and they are pinging mission and values. Colleges, I ask students, prospective students, to answer 4 questions before they get on their college search. Now, a little self-reflection never hurt. My own kids would not answer these questions, but I encourage other people's children to do it. The questions for the students are, I am, I expect, I value, I need. If you could use emojis. You don't need to use words. But if you can complete those 4 sentences, you'll know something about yourself, and then you can answer the question why a college fits for me rather than why I fit for this college. But colleges themselves need to answer those 4 questions when they think about this economic model. We are, we expect, we value, we need. We, too, we can't use emojis, or shouldn't anyway. We actually need to think about these things and answer those kinds of questions. We don't make it easy on ourselves in market terms because 3 things are true, I think, for us in the marketplace and the way we play in the marketplace. We are bred to compete, we play to win, and we prefer to own. That is, we provide what we produce, or produce what we provide. In many ways, those characteristics serve us well, right? It's a competitive marketplace. But it also creates a kind of expensive winner-takes-all force in the marketplace. It does place an emphasis on value and distinction, but as resources and economic constraints in families and institutions become increasingly challenging, that sort of I work alone, Mr. Incredible's great line in the movie The Incredibles, I work alone approach is increasingly untenable and increasingly idiosyncratic. The problem is that in exploring new and deeper collaborative opportunities to deliver what it is we do, we need to decide as well, what are we going to give up in terms of control? So as Mike referred to earlier about asking us about the way we do this at St. Ben's and St. John's, you should ask us, because we didn't choose actually to put together the easy stuff. We do not buy toilet paper and paper towels together. Go figure. We do, however, have one curriculum, and 60% of our employees are paid by both institutions. So we chose to put together the harder stuff, and in doing that, it created something wonderful, but not cost-free. And not cost-free in terms of the effort and sort of the traditional ways that people think about ownership and control that come into play. I have to give up something to get something to make something wonderful. But I think as resources become constrained and the choices we have become increasingly difficult, we're going to have to think more clearly in terms of partnerships. I also think we need to think more about integrated decision making. Colleges are very well organized vertically. We are less well organized horizontally. That we work well within our divisions, but we don't always play very well across divisions. I own this space. Now, I happen to have a really weird job that I own no space. And it means I get to play in everybody else's sandbox, which I actually really enjoy a lot. But I also think that it's an opportunity, as opposed to typically it's only the presidents that either get to or have to or are forced to do that. So I think there, in fact, are no discrete choices. All of our choices, I think, can be framed in the marketplace, can be defined cubically. Now, first of all, I get this thing that you're looking at is not a real cube. It's 3 by 3 by 2, but go with me, because it looks like a cube, and I've chosen to call it a cube. So I got asked that question one time, and I thought, you've missed the point. The universe of market choices that we make can be encompassed along 3 distinct but related dimensions. Enrollment profile, who are we going to enroll? Enrollment size, how many are we going to enroll? And what I would call student experience or educational identity, what are we going to provide to them, for them? What are we bringing to market? And within each of those dimensions, there's only a limited number of choices. Along the enrollment size, you only have 3 choices, more or less are the same. That's what you got. And along the enrollment profile, the who, there's only 3 dimensions. I can be more selective, less selective, or no change in selectivity at all, however you choose to define what selectivity means. I can have more of this, less of this, or the same of this, bless you. And in terms of educational identity, there's really only 2 choices. I can stay the way I am today, or I can make some change. But no matter what you choose to do, whether you choose to stay the same or change, and everybody starts someplace, there are 4 management questions inside that cube. What are the financial requirements to do this? What are the program, educational, curricular, or co-curricular requirements to do this? What are the recruitment requirements to do this? And what are the brand communication requirements? How do we have to describe this? The point here is that strategic decisions can't, and all economic decisions, or any economic decision, must be considered not along a single dimension, but along multiple dimensions. And we need to integrate mission, market, and management. And I'll finish with this. If, y'all know what this is, right? Everybody knows what the red B is. If you don't know what the red B is, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, because that'd be embarrassing, because everybody else does. But I did present this once in a room. The first time I used this was in a room of college presidents who were the wrong age, a lot of them, to understand what beets were in the non-organic vegetable category. But we only understand value comparatively. That's true for all of us. When I buy something, I only understand it in relation to something else. So I can walk into a grocery store and I can see I've got Del Monte beans or store brand beans. And I make a judgment about value. I may even make a judgment about how nice the can looks. We do that all the time with wine. Don't lie. If you're not a sommelier, you buy the wine on what the label looks like. But the issue is that you have to think about what the economic choice is in terms of comparative advantage, and where you have it and where you don't. And I think we can frame this economically quite simply. The marginal value of the experience we provide, however that's perceived, must be at least equal to the marginal effort, financial, psychic, or intellectual, required to obtain it. It's an immutable economic equation. And it's also something that people will mostly roll their eyes back in their heads. So it goes like this. It's beets versus bows. My 18-year-old son, my oldest, when he was 18, his over-ear headphones broke. A catastrophe for a high school senior who has to walk into a gym with an appropriately disaffected look on his face as Eminem is screaming in his ears. Because that's the way you win games, with cool headphones when you walk into a gym. And his broke. And he said, "Dad, will you buy me new headphones?" "No." because you have the money. Dad, will you pay for half of the new headphones? No, because that's the same question as the first one. I'll never see the money. No. The Beats were $300, the Bose were $150. He went into research mode, more than I think he did for college. They're very, very similar, actually. But Bose are sort of like your uncle's Mercedes. Nice, bit stodgy, sort of a classic brand, but Beats. Beats by Dre, Beats by Apple. It is all about the bass with the Beats. They're cool. They come in really great colors. And that B says something about who you are. So what did he buy? He bought the Bose, which is the only time in his life he's ever made a choice, because it was his own money, to spend less rather than more. But he bought the Bose because what he figured is the incremental gain he was going to get on the $150 for the Beats was not worth the amount of money. It turns out that's exactly the way we ended up talking to him about his college choice. The incremental cost of the school that it came down to, and he goes to St. John's, was $160,000 more between St. John's and this other school. And his mother said, well, that's easy. No. And I said, we have to give the boy a chance. So I asked him a question I knew he couldn't answer, which was, Andrew, if you can tell me why this school is worth $160,000 more than St. John's, you are free to go. Now, I knew the vice president for enrollment, the head of financial aid, the dean of admission at this other school. They're very good friends of mine, and I happen to really like this school a lot. But I didn't know. I couldn't answer that question, and he sure as hell couldn't. So he looked at me like, well, I can't do that. Well, there's your answer. No. So that was the way the choice went. But I think what happens is that if 98% of our genome, and that's sort of what happened here, if 98% of our genome, that is who we are, what we do, what we provide, and we shouldn't all go to market as friendly, caring learning communities dedicated to academic excellence and the development of the whole person, because we all do that. But we have to find something that's distinctive. What programs, experiences, or outcomes make you distinctive? How are you understood as distinctive? And how do you know? What is the footprint of your distinction? Is there a market for it? We considered a decade ago, this is before Mary Hinton and Michael Hemasath, so it's a fair story now. We considered a program in sacred liturgical music. We could have enrolled everybody in the country interested in sacred liturgical music, and both of them would not have made a difference to what we were trying to do. There has to be a marketplace for the distinction. And as you make economic choices, you need to do that. So before I get to the questions that you all get to do, I want to finish with this. Because if Lee chose to begin with John Donne and Edgar Allan Poe, I'm going to choose to finish with Charles Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Now, you all know that part, but I bet most of you could not recite what comes next, because what comes next is better. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epic of belief. It was the epic of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. That choice is ours. And by the way, written in 1859, that is still live and real today. So those are the comments I wanted to introduce. Now it's your turn. And I'm going to pose 3 questions. We're only going to give you about 5 minutes each on each at your table. So the first question is, these are not yes-no questions. I'm glad about that. What key constraints, existing or emerging, are reshaping your budgets today? And you have 4 minutes, because we'll come back and we'll see who offers anything up. Okay, question number 2, which is an extension of question number 1. We're just going to go through the questions. Please make sure somebody's writing them down. What key opportunities or choices must we pursue to offset the effects of the constraints? So this is, to use Joretta's language earlier, this is the gap part of this. So what opportunities or choices must we pursue to offset the effect of what you just described as constraints? Go. All right. There's one more question, and then we're done. And I'll do some housekeeping when we come back. But what economic choices have we defined, thus far anyway, as non-negotiable in relation to our mission or values? A lot of people will say everything is negotiable. My experience has been they never mean it. And so the question is, what have you up to now defined as non-negotiable? And how must we define, what's the process or the practice for defining what is negotiable and what isn't? You can begin to wrap up. I want to give a few details about what comes next. Please, it's important that somebody takes notes at your table, right? And so we will be, actually though, I'm not sure how that's going to work. If these are economic solutions for you, then they're probably just for you. Well, anyway, I hope somebody took notes at your table. We will be going to St. John's University for dinner this evening and for our keynote speaker this evening, Adam Weinberg. And the first bus, if you are taking a bus, will leave in front of this building, the Gorecki Dining and Conference Center, at 5 o'clock, which is 13 minutes from now. That bus will take you back as well. You will not have to find alternative means like Uber back afterwards. But there'll be more than one bus going. 5 and 5:30?
Every 30 minutes.
Every 30 minutes there'll be a bus going. So if you need to go back to your room, please feel free to do that. Thank you so much for engaging today in the spirit, in a vibrant, energetic way, in the spirit in which we had hoped it would go. We do hope that everybody had a terrific day. There is more to come. Stick around.